personal level, so the thing for me about the course, and this, I enjoyed it, it revealed a lot about me. I certainly consider myself to be reasonably intelligent. I've got an engineering background and I've been in a number of different industries. And, again, not that it matters, but, I've got a faith upbringing and still heavily involved. Consider that to be a big part of who I am. But I suppose the challenge is that I consider myself intelligent, but the market is anything but. It's very much about it'll do what it does. And I suppose the real challenge for the individual is not to get wound up over whether it's a win or a loss. It's a case of saying, well, have I followed my process, my system, my edge? If I have, move on. If I haven't, fix it. But ultimately, it's that headspace. The revelation for me is that I don't do things out of fear. So to give you an example, one of the reasons for why I don't do it, particularly with, I've got my self-managed fund. So to give you an example of when things went well, is I will put all my money into cash, I think about 3 or 4 weeks before the COVID crash. So very clever, then got back into the market at the right time and did well. But for a good part of the last 12 months, out of fear, I haven't had enough of my capital invested because I've been more concerned about trying to protect what I've got than I have about trying to grow it. And again, I'm focused on the outcome and what might happen and all the fear and such associated with it. So in my mind, I can relate fairly well to a one-off trade. But again, going back to being a consistent, peaceful investor and having consistent results is all about doing it over the long term, not happy days. I've got one that was a winner and the next one was a loss, but that's okay. And I'll go and repeat my mistakes for the one after that and the one after that. So it's very much about trying to, for me personally, it's getting over that fear, or getting around that so that I'm not trying to protect my capital. Although, yes, that's a function, but I've got to be confident that if I follow my system, then that by default will protect my capital. But what I'm not going to do is have a very successful retirement if basically let my money sit there and stew at the cash rate. That's the value for me in going through this process, was actually forced me to rethink what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and then, okay, how do I need to change that? So there's some things there. Then I've got for my own skills acquisition plan, which is very much around how do I then leverage that learning and do something with it without overthinking it. So that's the thing, is I just want to get on and do it, but I just want to make sure that I'm focusing on the right things. So that's where going through it a second time was good, because it helped me refocus on what is important and what I need to do to actually get it right. Long-winded way of saying I've enjoyed it, and at the second time around got more value out of it. And it's then trying to bring other things in. So be it Atomic Habits, be it Tony Robbins or any other piece of work. That was one of the other things. I was trying to do 3 or 4 different things at once, and you never actually get good at one of them. So for me now, it's more focusing on this body of work and getting that right, and then moving on to the next stage. You don't realise how big it is until you actually get into it, and especially the psychological side. Over the years with Tony Robbins, very, very similar around pain and pleasure, ways to improve behaviours, but it's also about identity as well. So there's a lot of parallels to both what James Clear has as well as Mark Douglas. Ironically, I probably read Mark Douglas 2014-15 in Bali, the trip with my son, and it was one of those things I'd get up early in the morning and read. In hindsight, didn't really take a lot of it in, other than I knew intuitively what he'd written was spot on, but I hadn't digested it. And I think that's, so at a personal level for me, I went through the mindset and process program a second time and finding things that I didn't pick up first time round. So I sort of went through with a different coloured biro, and I needed to leave more space between the first time round to actually add, because each time I suppose you come at it with a slightly different perspective and your lens is different. So for me, being open to that is one thing. The individual has to make the learning process intentional, because if it's not intentional, then you'll gloss over it and get to the other end and think, oh yeah, I can do that. So without being funny, there's no surprise as to how my trading's going. And it's not bad, but it's not good. Probably 3-4 points below where it should be as a minimum, but it's not consistent. So as an example, I'm out of the market at the minute, but knowing full well, and it's the psychological bit saying, well, I've got to be in the market. Otherwise, I'm really not going to be getting any benefit whatsoever, either from the system, regardless of what that is, or the compounding effect of money. And I can tell you all of it, but it means nothing if I'm not doing it. Comment in the program that the extent to which you avoid risk is the extent to which you effectively don't get the returns, or words to that effect. And I think that really sums up, I suppose, my state. But it's then very much trying to be intentional, just put it into practice. So I'm doing small things now, actually starting to do the 25 trade process using the portfolio manager, and that's indicative where I've tried to do it and to be clever and whatnot. If I look at how I've done it, I've been very much level 2. Level 1, maybe level 2 in terms of how I've approached it. And I haven't been diligent in recording my learnings, my feelings, my triggers, so that then I can come back next time and actually learn from it, as opposed to, oh, well, I'm just going to do all this again, which is effectively trial and error. Been good, but in short, the program is very insightful, which is good, and it's also repetitive, which is good for a lot of people, because you introduce topics or concepts but then repeat them in slightly different ways, and it makes a big difference in terms of how the message eventually sinks in. So from my perspective, a very good program. That's been partly my trouble. You get waylaid with seeing how it works rather than focusing on this bit up here. It's one of the things we learned many years ago, is that virtually anything you do, pick a number, 80-90% psychological and 20%, 10% of the actual doing, and the doing bit is by comparison relatively easy. If you've got a system set up, then you just follow it. But it's the psychology that is the bit that trips people up. Going back to what I said earlier around being intentional, I'm going to use the point that's been made, is that no amount of analysis is going to get you to where you need to be without fixing your mindset in the first place. If you don't come into the market with the right approach, again, expecting that anything can happen, and probably will, then you can have all the blind studies you like, but it's not going to help. The bottom line is still going to be, if you don't have your head right, then join the other 90%, please. The big thing that I got out of Mark's work, you guys repeated it, and hence why it's in my notes, is no wriggle room. And that's the thing for me, is when I'll know when I've got my system right, because there's no wriggle room. That's simple, but exactly what it needs to be. Primarily, I'm going to say the 4 fears. People fear losing money or leaving money on the table, but they end up leaving early or making a call based on anecdotal evidence as opposed to focusing on their edge. And I think that's, again, one of the keys for me, is that as much as a bit of gallows humour, but as much as I think I'm intelligent, that the reality is that from a market perspective, I'm not very intelligent, because I'm not following my system, which I hold true. So that's the thing, is I suppose you can say it as much as you like, but unfortunately, humans have to experience a certain amount of pain for them to be able to, revert and say, well, hang on, that's not working. That's not what I've done. To me, in part, it's also about doing the basics. So it's actually measuring. So one thing I haven't done is I do some very crude measures, and I know I'm profitable, but I'm going to say just. But the point is, because I don't measure it to the extent that I should, then I don't really have a definitive answer, as much as in my head I think I have. And I think that's the thing, is it's doing those basic things to make sure that you're in fact measuring your results, but you're also journaling, your feelings, your thoughts as you go into a trade, as you come out of a trade. In essence, it's about saying, am I actually doing the right thing? Am I honouring my system, measuring it? And I think that's key in a lot of it, is people just don't measure what they're doing. And you look at it with the insurances and all the other bits that go about, and mutual funds, it's too easy for somebody to say, not my problem, they'll look after it. The reality is the only people they're going to look after is them. And it's one of the reasons I put my money in a place where I could manage it, because no one's going to be more interested in my money than me. If you're not measuring your money, if you're not taking an active interest in what's doing, then essentially no one else is going to. Sadly, it comes back to the individual, and it comes back to when that penny drops, that it's theirs and theirs alone to manage, and they've got to be accountable for it. Short version is, I agree. The psychology is very much the driver for me, the roadmap. It's got to be the investment plan and the skills acquisition plan, and then the analysis fits in with that, because without the other two, the analysis becomes random. If you're very deliberate about your investment plan and skills acquisition plan, then your analysis becomes targeted or more targeted, whereas if you don't have those, then your analysis is very much like the old proverbial random walk, where you'll try, or I'll try this, well, that doesn't work, I'll try this, and I'll try this, and I'll try that. You don't actually end up anywhere conclusive. Spend your time chasing your tail. I've always had good support. The accessibility that you guys have is great. You've got the tools in terms of setting up skills acquisition plans, investment plans. You've got the learning materials. And also, again, without being funny, you're not arrogant enough to say, well, we've got it all. There's actually a number of references elsewhere to the likes of Mark Douglas, James Clear and those guys, and then the other books that you've mentioned in the references. I think, again, what is really good is the breakdown of things like habits, also the connection with trading in the zone. So for me, again, that's valuable, because because people can read a book superficially and not really get a lot of value out of it. And I think it's also the benefit in all that is it just challenges the way you think and especially how you approach the market. So probably more positives than learnings, but it's as much as anything, it's just trying to keep the stuff that you've got that is current. But again, you do that in part with the secular bull market presentations and the weekly updates, so that you're doing the work, trying to give people the wherewithal to actually unpack what's being done so that they can actually follow on the day and then go away and do their own work and unpack it. Because I think that's where the learning is. The learning is not just watching you guys do it. The learning is actually more, okay, I'm going to go and unpack it myself, learn a bit more in the process. From my perspective, huge thank you for all the work you guys do. It's just in a nice way. It's why I've stayed. There's value in it. The value is not what you give. It's more what I produce out of that. So, and that's my challenge. But it's good because we've got the support in a number of different formats. So that's greatly appreciated. Thank you.